Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to go ahead and get started with our webinar for navigating family dynamics as a caregiver. So first, before we get started, just a little bit about us. We are the National Center on Family Support, which is a center based out of Pittsburgh, funded by a grant from the Administration for Community Living and the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. Our mission is to partner with government, academia, and the family caregiver community to transform research into services and programs. Our goal is to improve the care, health, and quality of life of people with disabilities and the families that support them. We're very excited for today's webinar, and we're joined by an amazing group of advocates from Pittsburgh who are really excited to share their stories and experiences with you. To get the housekeeping out of the way, we will be recording today's webinar and we'll send out a link afterwards to everyone who registered so that you can watch it later. For any questions that come up, feel free to put them into the chat or the Q&A throughout. And at the end, I will go ahead and unmute everyone so that you're able to ask questions out loud, but your videos will not be shown. Everyone here today will receive a survey in the next day or so, and we really ask that you take the time to fill it out, because it really helps us improve our future programming and make sure we're giving presentations and webinars that are useful to you. So I would like to introduce the people who will be speaking with us today. We have first Tina Calabro and Mark Seidel. Tina is a writer and speaker specializing in disability issues, awareness, and support, and has led numerous community-facing projects. And Mark is a recent CCAC graduate, so congratulations, Mark. He serves on the youth caucus of the National Council on Independent Living and advocates for disability and LGBT rights. We also have with us Mary and Michael Hayter. Michael is a graduate of Edinburgh University. He participates in political discussions with the local men's group and advocates for civil rights. He has been quoted several times in local publications and the news on his perspective as an individual living with a disability. And Mary is retired from Achieva, where she advocated for families and individuals for over 15 years as the Achieva Home Care Supports Manager, and is also a 15-year board member for the Alliance for Community Respite Care. And because Pittsburgh is a small town, they have known Mark and Tina for more than 20 years. So it should be a very great conversation today. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen so that you can see better the people who will be talking. So first, I'm going to ask that the four of you tell me and everyone listening a little bit about yourselves. And just make sure that you unmute yourselves before you start talking.
Heather, do you want to call on us one at a time?
Sure. Why don't you start, Tina and Mark?
Okay. Well, my name, as you see, is Tina Calabro, and I'm a resident of the Highland Park neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And I live here in this house with my husband, David Steidel, and our son, Mark Steidel, who's here with me. And we have another son, Paul, and he lives in California. Mark is 25, and as I said, he lives here in the home with us. He always has lived here. And I work part-time from the home as a freelance writer. And and I'm also involved, as Heather said, in a number of disability rights and services initiatives. And I'm going to turn it over to Mark now.
Hello, my fabulous disability rights advocates. My name is Mark Untitled, and I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy as an infant, which affects my motor skills. Today, I am sitting in my black wheelchair, and I am wearing a pink button-down shirt. I use a communication device to speak. I identify myself as gender non-binary, and I use the pronouns they, them, and theirs. I am an out and proud member of the LGBTQ community. I recently completed my associate's degree in social work foundations, and I am from the fabulous city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I am very involved in fighting for disability rights, as well as LGBTQ rights, because I believe that everyone has a right to be unapologetically themselves. I work 1 day per week at OB9 of Us, a world leader in electronic communication devices. My job is in tech support.
Thank you both so much. I love what you said, Mark, about being unapologetically yourself. Said it perfectly. With that, I will turn it over to Mary and Michael to tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Hi, I'm Mary Hayter, and this is my son Michael, and we live in Kilbuck Township, which is in the North Hills. We, within the past 4 years, moved to, we had lived in Kilbuck before, but we moved to a different location, which is a world of difference in Michael's life experiences, because you know the terrain of Pittsburgh and how difficult it is to get in and out of homes. We live on a road that's a cul-de-sac, and most of the homes are accessible for Michael. So he has built up a wonderful support system of neighbors and friends that have just embraced him. We've had people who have purchased ramps so that he can get into their homes. We had a neighbor build a ramp so that he could get into his home. We've had other neighbors ask us how to get a ramp so he can get in his home. So he's blossomed since we moved here, which is good. But as we'll get into later, as for living arrangements, you know, and concerns as my husband and I age, what will happen in the future. I have another son whose name is Matthew, and both Matthew and I provide Michael's attendant care. So I may be retired from Achieva, but I'm certainly not retired because I work 7 days a week. And I'll turn it over to Michael.
Yes, you're never retired from being a mother.
Yes, that's true.
First of all, I want to thank Mark for the updates on their pronouns. That was news to me, so I appreciate that. And my pronouns are he, him, just so we get that out of the way. And I also, when we were setting this up, I also described Heather as myself as a concerned citizen. I don't currently have a job, but I'm very concerned about what's happening in our community and the world at large. So that has been my focus, just trying to engage people and trying to figure out how we build change on a local level. So.
When you're 35 years old.
I am. I'm old.
Thank you all so much. That was great. I'm going to go ahead and delve into our first question, which is just to tell us all a little bit about the care situation in your home. Do you rely solely on family or friends as caregivers? Do you have any paid caregivers? Is it a mix of both? And since Mary, you started to mention this a little bit, I'll let you and Michael talk first and just share a little bit about your situation.
Okay, well, in my job as a Chiva, as the home care supports manager, I dealt daily on the issues of families trying to find reliable and dependable caregivers to come into their home. And some people were very successful, and unfortunately, some people were not. So when Michael moved back home from college, that's when we first started looking into attendant care for him. I decided at that time that he has minimal hours. He only gets 5 hours a day, which to divide that up between more than one caregiver and spread that over, a course of 24 hours is impossible. So I signed on as his caregiver. When Matthew graduated from high school, then he came on board. He went to Robert Morris, so he was able to still live at home. So he was able to set up his school schedule so he could get Michael up and prepared for the day. And then I would do the evening routine, which is challenging because Michael's a night owl and he refuses to go to bed before 11 o'clock. So sometimes we have some little different disagreements about that. So over the course of the years of providing care, the hours have shifted between me and Matthew. And now at this point, I'm doing probably 90% of the hours. Matthew's married and lives in Shaler, so he comes 3 days a week and just gives Michael his shower and dresses him for the day. We're at the point where we need to consider getting additional help because it's just, it's too much for one person. But again, he has so few hours that it doesn't make sense. If I have somebody here and I'm making breakfast for myself, I might as well be making breakfast for him. If I'm doing laundry, I might as well do his laundry. So to have somebody come in for just a short amount of time and to find somebody who's willing to do that is a challenge. And also his waiver is the attendant care waiver. And what staff makes on that is so minimum that it's a challenge to get people.
Right.
So that's where we are right now. Originally, I had given him an ultimatum that when we moved here, he needed to start looking into finding a place of his own. But as I said, he is so ingrained in this community. He would love to be able to stay here, but financially, that's not something he can do. So we're letting him stay for the time being, and we've not had much success with his service coordinators. When I approach them about housing or what will happen or couldn't they help me, they pretty much leave it up to me to do it all on my own. They assure me that if he does move out, he would get more hours, but they can't guarantee it. I actually had one person say, well, have him move out with the 5 hours and then we'll see what happens. And 5 hours is not going to cut it. So that's
Not an option.
Yeah, so that's where we are with his care.
Thank you for sharing.
Well, they did increase my hours slightly, but it's still not.
He went from 35 hours to 40 hours when I expressed concern that 35 just wasn't enough. So,
well, and things are a little bit different now that everything is community health choices. I recently became dual eligible for Medicare under my mother's retirement, but that doesn't really affect the hours themselves. But this is all very complicated, and I've had several replacement service coordinators in the last several weeks, and so this pandemic has just sort of screwed everything up. So I don't know if Tina feels the same way.
and I can say from a family perspective, even though my son is a caregiver, when the quarantine first started, I was very comfortable with him coming into the house. I did have some concerns because his wife works at John Eagle, so she was out there in the trenches, being exposed every day. But since it's lessened up, he's taken a couple short trips, and I'm getting a little anxious as to whether or not I actually want him to come, because he's traveled to other states, and
Right.
My husband has health issues. You know, I have health issues. Michael has health issues. So, you know, we're very careful who we let in our home. We actually haven't let anybody in our home since this all happened. He had a nurse that came out to visit him, and we made her do it outside.
Right. Tina and I were having the same conversation right before the webinar, so I think we all certainly understand the need right now to be incredibly cautious about who we let into our homes. Tina, why don't you and Mark share a little bit about your care situation? Thank you, Mary and Michael. That was great.
So I'm going to say a little bit, and then Mark's going to say a little bit, and then back to me to say a little bit more. My husband Dave and I are the primary caregivers for Mark, and that is previous to the COVID lockdown and also just during it as well. And same thing with us, where there literally has been no one coming into our house since mid-March. But when we're not in a lockdown, Dave and I are also the primary caregivers at that time, although we do have other caregivers coming in. Mark's cerebral palsy makes it necessary for him to have an aide 24 hours a day. That's necessary for his personal care. Mark has a feeding tube, so that has to be monitored and implemented throughout the day. And also his positioning has to be at different times of the day, and whether he's having exercise or something else. So for those reasons, Mark can never just be in the home by himself without somebody within earshot who can immediately, you know, assist Mark if he needs to use the bathroom, or if he's having some problem, if he got into a bad position in his chair, or any number of things. It would not be safe for Mark to not have an aide in the vicinity. And so that means there always has to be somebody here. So that's our baseline right there. And Mark's going to say a little bit more, and then I'll add to it.
My parents are my primary caregivers, but then I have staff through 2 agencies, BAYAP and Pathways. With Pathways, I have been able to hire my staff directly and have them get paid through agency with choice. Currently, I have 4 staff through Pathways and 1 through BAYAP, which is a traditional home health care agency.
Right, and I want to clarify how Mark's situation, even though Mark and Michael are both wheelchair users and both have a diagnosis of cerebral palsy, that they're in 2 different systems, and those 2 different systems accommodate different types of care scenarios. Mark is also considered, because of his medical needs, to have multiple disabilities, and he also has a communication difficulty where he can't, let's just say, for example, if he could use a telephone, you know, whether that's through Siri or any other way, to call for help, that would increase his safety, because he can't use the telephone and call for help or get help, or even call for somebody that's at a distance. That puts him into a different category in terms of his overall care. So Mark is in what's called the IDDD system. It's the intellectual disability and developmental disability system. And in that system, he is eligible for, you know, basically I would say 24-hour-a-day care, although since my husband and I are here, we never would be using 24-hour-a-day care because we're here. But he is eligible for that level of care. If you just look at it like in terms of that during waking hours, he needs 16 hours a day of care, and that would add up to 112 a week. We use, in terms of paid caregiving hours, about 80 a week. So my husband and I are both employed through this format that's called Agency with Choice. And that's there's many formats for all of this throughout the systems, but basically that means that with Agency with Choice that you can recruit, hire, and manage your own caregivers. So my husband and I are employed by Mark as the managing employer, and we are eligible for 60 hours a week of paid employment. So so my husband and I share that 60 hours a week. And then Mark also has, as he mentioned, 4 staff that are also in that Agency with Choice format, and one that's comes from a traditional home health agency. And those 5 caregivers combined in a typical time are working about 20 hours a week. It's not really a great amount of time, but it's very helpful when they are working. Right now they're not working, and none of them. So that's about 20 hours. And Mark is also eligible for nursing care, which also could be added into the mix. Right now, there are no nurses available for us, so we're not having any nursing, but we could add that component in. So Mark's overall caregiving scenario is quite good if in a typical time, and if we can staff the entire time. Let me see if there's anything else. Oh, I wanted to mention that we're probably a good example of a family that doesn't have family nearby. We have no family in Pittsburgh. So we do have some family that's an hour away or farther away. But because we're a family of just 3 here, and then our other son is in California, we're the main unit of caregiving. And we are, beyond Dave and me, we are completely dependent on non-family caregivers. So that completes what we
Thank you. I'm going to delve right into the next question because we started to talk about it already. So there's this, Tina, you and Mark can talk about it from a personal experience, and Mary, maybe you can talk about this because you worked in the field. So there's this mix of family and paid caregivers in the same house. Can you talk a little bit about being comfortable with this, if you had to make any adjustments, mentally or emotionally, to having paid caregivers in the house with you while you're also there?
Okay, Mark's going to speak first on
Perfect.
that.
I am very comfortable with having paid caregivers in my home. And I think that is because I give them written guidelines so they understand what I expect of them. It has worked out well for the majority of my staff, so I go with the flow when my staff is doing a great job. Other times, I have to tell it like it is.
And at this point, we wanted to share our screen and show you the sheet of guidelines that Mark gives to his paid caregivers. This is something personally generated. It's not part of his ISP for his consolidated waiver. So I'm going to share the screen and try to get this up there. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Share. Okay, so what you see there is guidelines for personal care assistants and nurses, and it just goes through that, please be respectful, please always be honest with me, please try to be on time, please respond to my texts or emails. And then it goes on from there to talk about if we go out in the community, what Mark's expectations are. And, you know, then there's more expectations of assistance. And, you know, there's some things about scheduling because with this agency with choice, he schedules his staff and he shares a Google Calendar with them. And so if he posts the open shifts, he's telling them that he wants them to check that Google Calendar and keep that up to date at their end as well. So this has been really helpful for Mark to manage his staff. So I'm gonna go ahead and close that. I'm gonna stop the share. And then I'm gonna just add briefly that our house is not large. So Dave and I are a little bit less comfortable with having caregivers than Mark is. Yeah, so we have had to think about how to have privacy. So one of the ways we do that is Mark is usually in his bedroom or he's in a family room area that those two areas are the main areas that Mark's in any given day. So that really helps us so that we can be in other areas of the house with not always having to interact with staff. And so we just do that. And then another thing that we do is we try to keep chatting to a minimum with the staff because I think especially because Mark's an augmentative communication user that people that are able to speak with their own voice, we're used to doing a lot of chatting and that doesn't benefit the person that uses a device that has to work harder to participate. So on that count is one reason why we limit our conversations with the aides, but also just because it really takes up a lot of time and emotional energy. So we're nice, we're courteous, we're very thankful to the aides, but we don't do a lot of talking about extraneous things. I wanted to also mention that a key to having a very peaceful life in our house with aides coming in on a regular basis is to choose those aides carefully. Even though there's a crisis in getting staff, but still there is some room for choice. And Mark is, in that sense, Mark is very much in charge of who we choose for staff. And he has taught me not to try to make a prospective staff member a part of his team when it is obvious that it's not a good fit for our team here. So he's laughing at me right now because I always try to do it because I tend to get in that panic with it's a small pool of people that we have to choose from. Whereas he's saying, don't go there because you know it's not going to work because it's not a good fit. And so we're on the same page with that. And he is the managing employer, so he gets to have that say. Let me interject one other thing because Mary talked about the wages. That the other thing when you get into like the pool of people, the wages in the attendant care system are much lower than the wages in the IDDD system. And so that hourly rate, just as a net, can go up to about $17 an hour. So we, although there is a crisis and it's hard to find workers, we do have a little bit more interest because of the wage. And so we are, we're very thankful for that. I was going to just add one other quick comment, and that is that when there are issues in the house about how we're all coexisting together, that it's really good to address those issues immediately when they come up. And Mark has been very good at leading the way in those conversations and letting me support him, but not be the person that's leading them. And we definitely have had to have difficult conversations with some of the staff that's come to our home.
Thank you. Mary and Michael, do you have anything that you would like to add?
I would agree with Tina. That's when I was working, that's one of the major issues was how the staff interacts with the individual and their families. I found that when families are so grateful to have, someone to come in, that they kind of let down their expectations and they become too friendly. And once you cross that line of you're not an employee or an employee, but you view yourself more as friends, that's when the problems seem to arise. So Tina has the right perspective, and you got to keep it professional. You got to keep the talking to a minimum. Privacy is important. It's one of the reasons why I don't have anybody. I'm not comfortable having somebody come in the house. I like my privacy. Michael likes his privacy. I try and respect and give him as much privacy as I can. He's pretty much like Mark. He's either in his room or in the living room, or he's out on the street talking up the neighbors. But there could be hours that we don't talk to each other, correct?
Yes, it's made quarantining a little bit easier because we sort of have our designated areas, and in a perfect world you wouldn't have to rely on family for caregiving, but unfortunately we don't live in that world, and frankly that world is even harder to achieve than it was a few years ago. So I think there's quite frankly there's a lot of open questions for the disability community right now, and I'm very worried for my community. So it's been a difficult time, but I think we've managed as well as one could hope.
And family as caregiver, that's a very, that's a growing field. I would say a good percentage of individuals have a family or a friend or somebody they know that is part of their caregiving team. A lot of other people look down on that and feel you're taking advantage and you're making money off of your loved one, but it's a job, and if you're doing it and they're getting the care they need, there shouldn't be any stigma to it. So we encourage families to, spread out the net and try and find caregivers on their own, just because the pool is so small. And like Tina said, the wages for Michael's waiver, it's like $10 an hour. So somebody could work at Target's going to be paying $15 an hour, and you're not doing perfect care on somebody. So, it's a tough choice.
Right. I want to give just a very brief background for anyone who doesn't know. The waivers that Tina and Mary have both referenced are waivers that you apply for that then help to cover the expenses for paid caregivers, so that you're not responsible for paying that out of pocket. So Mary, you kind of teed up my next question, which is talking about navigating living in the same house, but still maintaining your privacy and your independence, both for all of you, not just as a parent, but also as a child and an adult child living in a house with your parent, and making sure that you all have your boundaries. Mm-hmm. So Mary and Michael, if you want to start, since you've already started a little bit.
Well, like I said, he pretty much spends a lot of time in his room. Since the quarantine, he's become the master of Zoom. He's I don't know how many Zoom meetings have you participated in, Bible study groups, late into the night phone calls, politics. So I pretty much, if he's getting on my nerves with his political ranting, I just close his door and go about my business. Our bedrooms are far enough apart that there's a lot of privacy, but he claims he can hear me breathing through the air conditioning duct. So
sound carries, mother.
But so he always knows what I'm doing. I don't hear what he's doing. So.
Well, one thing I will say is that I do think that if there's one good thing about the quarantine, it's brought back good old-fashioned phone calls. I don't know why we got rid of them as a society. I think that was a mistake. I hope they stick around. And yeah, like I said before, we kind of have our own little areas, and we just sort of interact as needed and try not to get on each other's nerves. Sometimes it doesn't succeed, but you know.
And like I said, he's fortunate enough that he's able to go out and get away from us more so than I am able to get away from him. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Heather, do you want us to speak?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'll start, and then Mark is going to go second. So we said that, you know, a part of the boundaries and so forth, that Mark's center of activities is by and large his bedroom, where he has all his computer, everything. And so I try to give him privacy there, although he disagrees with me about that I'm not doing that, but I do try. Mark does like to stay up late, as I hear Michael does also. So my husband and I have had to work out a system where Dave gets up early in the morning and does all the personal care that Mark needs in the morning hours. And then I sleep in the morning, and then I stay up late and get Mark to do all his nighttime care, and then get him to bed, you know, by about midnight. And this is the only way it could be, because when my husband and I, for many years, were trying, at least Mark's 25, so I'd say during his teenage through young adult years, when we were trying to do the same thing, like Dave and I waking up at the same time and going to bed at the same time, it just wasn't working, because it just wasn't working. So we had to change the time and also our sleeping arrangements because of that. And it's totally practical. And, but that is an adjustment we've had to make. Mark is, he's not able to go out in the neighborhood because he doesn't drive his power chair right now. It's not, for him, it's not functioning quite right, because it has a lot of electronics that are very delicate, and he has to drive it with his head, and our street is very hilly, and a lot of reasons, but he's not able to drive that out in the neighborhood. So when he goes somewhere, it has to be in the van, and he can go anywhere he would like to go in a non-pandemic time. It does take planning about who is going to go with him, who's going to drive the van, you know, and all that kind of thing. And so planning is really a big part of how we plan for Mark to be able to do what he wants to do and have the privacy and autonomy that he wants to have. But then at the same time, it's true about that although we plan a lot, that a good part of the time, the plan that we have doesn't work out, because either the staff can't be there or some other reason. So we're always having to be flexible on that all the time. And so now Mark's going to take over.
I am a self-advocate, so I am always trying to tell my mom to give me privacy. And of course, she likes to do the exact opposite. I should start telling her, if anyone watches reruns of Golden Girls, they will understand the reference. My relationship with my mom is like Dorothy and Sophia's relationship, because my mom is always peering at my computer screen where I should not be. Another challenging part of living at home is that I do not get to be as independent as I would like to. For example, before this pandemic happened, I was out and about with my staff a lot, and I would always come home very glad that I did what I wanted to do. Obviously, I am not going out right now, and I am always with my parents, so it is hard to have privacy. I definitely think that the pandemic has given me a shocking sense of reality of what it is like to be dependent on my parents for a long period of time. and it does not feel good.
Thank you. So, Mark, you just mentioned part of my next question, which was, and this is my final prepared question. So if anyone thinks of anything that they want to pop into the Q&A or the chat now, you can go ahead. And if not, I will unmute everyone at the end. But can you each tell me what you find the most challenging? Very big picture, broad, general question, so you can share whatever you like. Tina and Mark, if you would like to start us off.
And Mark's going to begin.
Let me start out by saying that living with my parents is a challenge because they think very differently from me. I think to myself, I am 25 years old and I still do not have the freedom I want because I live with my parents. What I fail to realize sometimes is that even though I love myself, I am making my situation seem harder by subconsciously cursing myself. Let me be clear by saying that, like most people, I make mistakes and blame myself. I think the main reason I curse myself is that I never created the opportunity to move away from home and grow on my own. However, another reason I probably curse myself is that I do not take a couple minutes out of my busy schedule to say, I am beautiful, I am strong, I will not be defeated. This is a good habit for anyone.
And, I should start out by saying that the questions that you ask, Heather, has helped Mark and I in preparing our answers have a deeper understanding of each other. I want to add to this that for challenges for Dave and me is that at the ages that we are, I'm 67, Dave is 70, that we are actively trying to do some future planning to say, how can we lessen our presence as primary caregivers for Mark and shift that role to staff? It's a complicated move that would have to be made, but we're exploring this actively in a number of ways. We have an idea in our minds that we'd like to be able to do this in 3 to 5 years, that the majority of Mark's care would be carried out by other people, and that Dave and I would be a safety net, and we'd be around as much as possible, but that we would not be the primary caregivers. We would live nearby, but we wouldn't have to be in the house all the time. So we are working on that scenario, and that scenario would also work if Mark decides that he doesn't want to stay in this particular house. If he wanted to go somewhere else, then the staffing issue is, wherever you go, the staffing issue comes along with you. So wherever the residence is, it's still there. And we're trying to actively work on that while we're still, like, quote, young old. We're not middle old or old. We're young old. We can work on it. And we do have good resources, like,
Yes.
we have worked with Mary at Achieva, and we have good relationships with our staffing sources. So it's not a problem for us to have relationships with agencies. The problem is the pool of available staff. It just is not there. And but once we do find people, we apply, and it does take some intentionality. We apply our philosophy here in the house, and we have a pretty good record. Mary can tell you, keeping people for an average of like 2 to 5 years on board. So we feel like we have figured out over 25 years how to do that, how to be a good home. And so you know, it is a challenge in the sense that we have to keep our minds on it. And, but, you know, we're hopeful and we're trying to work on it, but there are no easy solutions to this issue of parents as primary caregivers becoming older and
Right.
what happens at that point. So I'll finish there.
Thank you. Mary and Michael, is there anything that you would like to talk about, what you find the most challenging?
Well, first I'd like to thank Tina for reminding me of young old and middle old and old because I took a psychology of aging course. We specifically talked about those categories. And also I should say that one of my neighbors, Joe, is actually a gerontologist. And for those who don't know, a gerontologist basically studies old people. So Joe and I are constantly discussing what it means to age and how aging can be beautiful. And, you know, you keep talking about Mark being 25, well, I'm 35, so I'm creeping towards the middle age. You know, that's actually fairly old for a, you know, person in my position. And so, you know, just trying to figure out like what that means, as Tina said, is difficult.
And I agree with Tina. That's our biggest challenge. I try to get Michael to think what will happen. You know, I'm a couple years older than Tina. So, you know, you wake up every day and you say, well, thank God I made it through another day. But what would happen if I didn't? And with this whole, again, the virus just put everything in a new light when you hear couples who have, you know, both gotten it and passed away, you know, in a blink of an eye. We really don't have a definite plan in place, and I'm trying to get Michael to think about it, and it's baby steps, but we're trying. And again, we're like Tina, we don't really have any family other than my son. There's no extended family nearby. When I was working, they used to talk about how, you know, community should step in and help. And I will say, again, the merits of this street, we've had neighbors that, you know, have gotten Michael involved in church. They actually come and use our van and take him to church. People take him out to the movies using our car. People take him to dinner, again, using our car. But when he's on his own and doesn't have a car, how's he going to get around? So all that support's going to disappear when he leaves. So these are my concerns. What's going to happen when he has to eventually move somewhere else?
So I am going through and unmuted, well, allowing the audience to unmute themselves. But while I do that, we do have a question in the Q&A. Do you find that when staff inform you that they will be leaving, that it is more due to financial considerations or the fatigue of the work involved? And by fatigue, they don't mean just physically, but also mentally as well, especially when they don't necessarily have an emotional investment like a family member. Have you ever been able to convince someone to stay longer, or is it just part of the situation? And what would you say is the most important question to ask when bringing staff on board? I know that was a lot, so let me know if you need me to repeat any part of that.
Heather, are you able to post that in the chat? I didn't catch all the question.
I think so, yes.
You know, you did ask about what is the most important question to ask. Mark has a whole set of questions that he asked, so we're not quite prepared with that list to share. But
Sure.
I know one of the biggest one for me is like, where do you live in this city of ours? Because most of the time, the location of the person is going to have a very big impact on their ability to be here. So I would say in all of the time that we have had aides here, that we have never had, maybe once, had, everyone's been relatively within you know, 10 miles. So that's always a big one. Okay, so let's look at that. When that they will be leaving. So when, okay, have you ever been able to convince someone? I would say that whatever the person's reason is for leaving, that's the end of the story. Whatever the reason is, to be respected. I never would try to convince anyone to stay if that was their decision that they were wanting to leave. Even if there's nobody to replace that person, I don't never want to be in a situation of desperation where you're asking somebody to do something that they don't want to do. If it's something that you can work through, if there's a little tweak that can be made to make the job better, that I would make that, but I wouldn't try to convince somebody to stay. And especially like we were talking about the wages being, if the wages are low, you know, I just don't think you can do that. But, you know, it does raise the question of sweetening the pot a little bit and giving a little bit of extra money to the staff person. That is a distinct possibility. Although I have to say that I have not done that, but I could imagine that would be acceptable to me if that was the issue. That, you know, the out of pocket enhancement of that wage.
Yeah, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say from my experience as supervising staff that pretty much when they reach that point where they want to leave, they're either burnt out from the job or there's family dynamics that they can't handle. So there's not a whole lot you can do to keep somebody that doesn't want to be there. I mean, I would sit down with staff, I would sit down with family and try and see if there was a way to do it. But 9 times out of 10, when they're ready to move on, it's best that you both go your separate ways.
Thank you.
I mean, it's a stressful job. It's stressful as a parent to be providing this care. So to have a stranger come in and expect them to, you know, care for your child the way you do, it doesn't always happen. And people don't always have the mindset that, you know, this is a real job and you need to show up and families depend on you. And if you can't commit to that, then you're in the wrong field.
I have a question about balancing your time and finding time for yourself. And this is mostly directed at Mary and Tina. Finding time for yourself and to see your friends when a lot of your time might be spent providing care. And this is for both pandemic times and non-pandemic times. I know it might be a little bit different right now.
Mary, could I go first on that? And just to say that because I'm here with my husband and we're primary caregivers, that the biggest thing is that we very rarely can do anything together outside the home. Now we're here together all the time in the home.
Okay.
But for us to even go out to dinner, forget about a vacation. We have not had a vacation together in decades. But for us to do anything together separate from our caregiving responsibilities is not a possibility. So there's definitely a challenge. That is the future that we're looking for in transitioning to a more staff-driven environment, so that Dave and I can take a walk in the park or go away for a weekend.
Yep, I agree. Michael has a much more active social life. I have no social life. Michael gets invited to dinner parties and movies, and like I said, the neighbors come and pick him up and take him away, and that's my time to take a nap or do the laundry or go grocery shopping. You know, even though he only has 5 hours when he's here, I'm pretty much on call 24 hours a day, and people don't understand that. I actually had a person once say to me, I was having trouble when they went to telephony, clocking in and clocking out on the right time. And I said to the person, well, you don't understand. If I'm in the middle of making lunch and my time is up, I sometimes forget to immediately clock out. You know, he only has 5 hours. And her response was, well, then you need to put him in a home. You shouldn't be. I'm like, what? You're missing the point. So, you know, like I said, you're basically on call 24 hours. And even as a mother, if, you know, you would understand this, you know, when your kids are babies and little, you sleep with the ear open. Are they going to need you in the middle of the night? And I still do that at 35 in case he needs something in the middle of the night. Fortunately, it's not often, but you need to be aware. And that's another one of my biggest fears is, should he live on his own, he would not have any staff. Once he would be put to bed, he would be alone. And should an emergency arise, he would not be able to get out of bed. He would not be able to do anything. And I'm just not comfortable with that.
Right. I'm going to see if the audience a moment to ask any questions out loud if they would like to. I don't hear any, so I'm going to go ahead and ask one final question directed to Tina before we wrap things up, which is, can you talk a little bit about how far along you are in the process of planning to provide less support to work? Or even just talk a little bit about what that process looks like for the three of you.
Right. So we're really deep into that process. We have been for a couple of years, and it will continue to go on. Like, we have all our legal papers in order, the wills and the powers of attorney and, you know, all that kind of thing. And then the planning for the actual scenario of what a staff-driven home or residence situation would be for Mark. We're actively engaged in that. And I want to point out that we're not engaged with it so much with the supports coordinator, who's the county and state representative for our, you know, for Mark's waiver, because they don't have the time, and they do not have the actual responsibility to hold our hands through future planning. They can do some things, but it's not really their job to dig into future planning and to explore all the alternatives. So we are doing these explorations with providers for healthy providers that have a good business model, understand the system. And so we are in deep conversations with Achieva, with Marikey, with other people that know the territory, providers that know the territory, so that we can process what scenarios are possible and have some probability of being successful.
We had one final question pop up, which is, do any of you get respite in any way from an agency? And also a thank you for all that you do as caregivers.
We don't get any respite.
No,
There's no, I don't even believe there's respite available for Michael. Or I don't even believe there's any respite out there for anybody at this point in time.
I have to agree with you, Mary. There may be some respite programs out there, but they don't apply to our situation. Mark's care is very specific. You have to know how to operate lifting equipment. You have to know how to handle feeding tube and you know, a lot of really subtle things about a person's care, he can't just drop into a respite center, or he cannot be cared for by somebody that doesn't really know him and has been trained in his needs. So no, there is no respite for us.
Well,
This is
oh, sorry.
Bill McDowell. I don't know if you can hear me, Tina.
Yeah, I can hear you, Bill.
You know, your issues that you and Mary are speaking about, or really, in my estimation, big, you know, really big, and it goes to the value that we don't put on attendant care, and nationally, and somehow with advocacy, we've got to change the narrative here and get um, more value put on the assisting and attendant care, and that begins with raising the wage, um, and um, and that, because the comment that you made earlier, and I made that in the chat, is just the simple fact of not being able to go out to dinner with your husband because you have to be home all the time. And Mark saying earlier, he has no autonomy in his life. He can't do the things that he wants to do. And again, it just, not the, anyone who doesn't have a disability would want those basic things, to be able to go out when they're older, to be able to go out to dinner with a family member, friends, husband. And it just speaks to how we do not value the aspect of attendant care in this country and in Pennsylvania. And we really have to do something about that.
Well said, Bill.
Mhm.
I think that is a great place for us to wrap up for today. Since we are coming to the end of our hour, I want to thank all of you so much for your incredible insight. I know there were one or two questions that we did not get to, so I will pass them along to Mary and Michael and Tina and Mark after, and give them the chance to answer them and send them out when we send out our recording of the session. So I just want to thank all of you for joining us today. You can always visit our website at www.caregiving.pitt.edu, or send us an email at caregiving@pitt.edu, especially if you have any suggestions about future webinars that you would like to hear. And as a reminder to please fill out the survey when you receive it in the next day or so. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing with us. We so appreciate your honesty, and
No.
truly inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you. Why wasn't he showing up in the?